and welcome back to the Across the Pod NFL podcast for episode 3 of our 32 season previews. And this time the team is the Las Vegas Raiders. And as you can see, I'm joined by a special guest, best known for his work in the UK at Sky and TalkSPORT. Back with us today for the Raiders season preview is Jeff Reinebold. Jeff, how are you?
I'm great, man. I tell you, it's always Andy. It's always a pleasure when I get to talk about my Raiders.
Yeah, it's you talked about before about your childhood love being both mixture of the Lions and the Raiders, so it's always good to have you on to talk all things Raiders.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting time in the history of the franchise. Antonio is going to go into his second year, and this will be a full year. I can't um, maybe even describe well how difficult it is to come in under the circumstances that he came in under. The team was frustrated. The team was, I think there was some real inside issues in that building. Josh just didn't, it just wasn't a good mix. And obviously, when you saw Max Crosby come out and say openly that, he wanted Antonio to get the job. And, there's always, anytime there's a mid-season change, it's incredibly disruptive. And, there's a scrambling for, it's like scrambling for lifeboats on the Titanic. I mean, it's just, the ship's going down and you're just trying to survive it and, stay employed. And so it's very, very, very difficult. And I thought he did an outstanding job. And I'm really excited about, the addition of Tom Telesco as the general manager, and then to see what Antonio's able to do with his staff, with the staff that he's been able to, assemble on his own. I have three guys inside that building I'm very close to. Rob Ryan, who I've worked with, and he worked for me, and then Matt Sheldon, who is part of the analytics department there. And then one of my old players, Josh Phillips, who played for me in NFL Europe, is now a defensive assistant there. So those guys were unanimous in, their endorsement of Antonio and what he's doing inside the building and trying to build back the Raider culture. And I think they've really taken some steps that way. I know a lot of the pundits and a lot of the talking heads, kind of ripped him a little bit for this offseason, but I don't see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, we saw just a couple of seasons ago John Gruden go mid-season. Rich Bisaccia comes in and has a great, second half of the season down the stretch, makes playoffs, and obviously didn't go for him, went for Josh McDaniels. But do you think almost they've learned from that, the front office or the owners, the fact that they didn't give the interim guy the chance last time after doing a good job in his interim spell? Do you think that almost played a little bit of part in their decision to give him the permanent job, not just for how they performed with Pierce, but also almost learning from the mistakes from a couple of years ago by not giving the interim guy a chance at the full-time job?
Well, I think there's a couple parts of it. I think number one, there's some truth to that they reconsidered, and realizing that they had made a mistake with bringing in Josh. It just didn't work. Gruden left under such tough situation, and Bisaccia did a great job, I thought, of bringing that team together, and they played much better down the stretch. And I think that probably Mark Davis learned that sometimes you got to listen to the players, and I think the players learned, because I think Max and I know Bisaccia was really popular with the locker room, but obviously so was Antonio, and I think the players kind of decided that, led by Max Crosby, that they were going to, at least let their feelings be known in a more vocal way this time. And I think that really swung the pendulum in Antonio's favor.
And you're a coach yourself. Do you think there's a difference in terms of a coaching job in terms of, because we see it in our version of football, there's people come in as caretaker managers, they get the top job on a full-time basis, and it just somehow doesn't quite work out as much, and almost like a little bit of a honeymoon period when they are the interim manager. And do you think, or do you worry at all about Pierce, the fact that he did well, obviously came in as interim, and that's also it's a whole different ballgame when you're the full-time head coach. Does that worry you at all, the fact that You worry that maybe a bit of a honeymoon period with him being interim, just almost as anyone but McDaniels, and that sort of that change he had. But do you think does that worry you at all? The fact that it's a whole different ball game between being an interim and being the full-time head coach.
Well, I think there's kind of a natural when you're struggling as hard as they were struggling, and and then all of a sudden there's a change, and it's like a breath of fresh air. Well, now though, I think we really will see exactly what Antonio's plan is. I gave him really high marks last year for a couple of things. He wasn't afraid to say, I don't know. He wasn't afraid to go out and get people, ex-head coaches who he'd worked for in the past, Tom Coughlin, a number of guys come in and actually spend time with him. Because I've done it one time, and I'm going to tell you something. When you move to the corner office, when you move down the hall to the corner office, yeah, your view's a little better, your furniture's a little nicer and all that, but your problems are incredibly more difficult because you now have everything under your plate, right? And I think that having an experienced GM like Telesco is going to help. I think both of those guys have been through transitional situations and they know how difficult that is. I think, Antonio's popularity in the locker room is really going to help him. He retained a number of coaches that he felt good with, and he brought in some new guys that he felt comfortable with and he wanted to put his own stamp on it. I think that's important. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into winning, not just the coaching part of it, but I think the Raiders are headed in the right direction. And we'll see as we go through this interview, why I feel that way. And we'll actually, I guess, pick games at the end. And, I saw some, Sandy, it's interesting. I saw some of the talking heads say the Raiders, the over and under is basically 6 on wins for the season. I think that's really low. And, but we'll see.
Yeah, we will later on in our win-loss tie segment. Heading on to sort of the off-season as a whole, looking at the main in, some of the highlight ones include Christian Wilkins, Gardner Minshew, Michael Gallup, Jalen Guyton, and some of the main, obviously re-signing as well, like Alexander Mattison, John Jenkins, and Adam Butler. The main outs include the likes of Josh Jacobs, Jimmy Garoppolo, Tyreek Jones, and DJ Fluker. Heading on to the draft itself, the first round pick was Brock Bowers, tight end at 13 overall. Other ones include Jackson Bowers Johnson, center 44th overall. And other ones include Delmar Glace, 77th overall. And the Camarion Richardson out of Mississippi State, the cornerback, 112th overall, just to name a few of the draft picks. Just overall for you, Jeff, your take on the offseason as a whole, the incomings and outcomings at the Raiders.
Well, I think there's a couple things. You look at how you build a football team in the offseason, and again, free agency is the first thing you got to deal with, and then the draft is the second thing, and then you continue on through free agency all the way up until until it kick it off, right? I mean, you're constantly trying to improve your roster. I thought the 2 key additions to me. And you could see that Antonio and the Raiders brass felt like they had to get better up front. Right. So you go out and get Christian Wilkins. You got to go back almost to Warren Sapp to think about the last time they had a dynamic inside pass rusher with the Raiders. And Wilkins certainly gives you that. Now, that's an amazing pairing with Max Crosby. How much better are they going to make one another? Because Mad Max is going to be a guy that's going to squeeze the pocket from outside. And, you got Wilkins who can push the pocket from inside. And so I think their skill sets complement each other and really are going to help the front of that defense. On the other side, re-signing, Andre James, I think was a critical re-sign for him. And we'll talk about Jackson Powers Johnson as we talk about the draft, but there's a guy that, I watched him on tape when I got here at Hawaii because Hawaii had played Oregon last year. And I'm going to tell you something, he is a full grown man. And I think he will be an outstanding guard now in the National Football League. I think it even suits him a little, better. Signing Minshew, I thought was a good signing. And I think this is one of the reasons that the Raiders getting, knocked a little bit for the offseason is they're saying, well, they didn't get a quarterback of the future. They didn't get a franchise quarterback. There's two thoughts on how do you grow a football team. You draft a rookie and then you build around him, or you build around him until you find one that can do what you want the guy to do. All I'm going to say to all of those guys who ripped the Raiders for not taking a quarterback, not moving up in the draft, right? You look at the success rate of rookie quarterbacks in the NFL, and it's right about 50%, right? With Gardner Minshew, you know what you're getting. Now, Gardner Minshew is a good enough quarterback to win with. We saw that in Indianapolis last year. He's probably not a good enough quarterback to win a Super Bowl with, but you got to make a decision. If you don't feel like you can move up or down to get yourself in a position to get what you want in the draft, then you stay where you're at and draft well where you're at. And I think that they did. Now, when you look at where they were, they could have moved up to get Bo Nix or Michael Penix or JJ McCarthy maybe. But are those guys, I mean, if you just look at it from an analytics standpoint, of those three guys, two of them are going to be failures. And that's what history tells us in the NFL. So are you willing to mortgage that first round pick on that, or go out and take a first round pick like Bowers, who is, you talk about a prototypical NFL tight end in this era of NFL football. He's exactly what you're looking for. He's dynamic after the catch. He's a willing blocker. You try and say, okay, who's a like comparison? Well, you'd say Travis Kelce, but he's a much better blocker, a much more willing blocker than Travis Kelce. He's a football guy. Here's the thing that I loved about what they did in the draft, Andy, is they drafted guys that were football guys, right? That loved football. And I think that's Antonio's stamp on those guys. He wanted those kinds of guys. Brock Bowers is that guy, right? California kid, goes all the way to Georgia. Why? Because he wanted to play the best football that he could play in the SEC. Dominates in the SEC. Jackson Powers Johnson, same guy. Loves the dirty work. Loves the physical part of the game. Loves being in. I mean, he's a freaking offensive lineman, bro. He is exactly what you're looking for. So I thought those two drafts. Now, I was a little bit surprised with Delmar Glaze, because Delmar Glaze has all of the attributes, right? He's 6'5", he's 330 pounds, he got great feet, but he hasn't really played as well yet as he's capable of playing. He's one I'm going to watch real close. And then you talked about DeCamerion Richardson out of Mississippi State. Interesting corner, physical, great looking body, checks all the boxes. Not afraid to tackle. He was one of the leading tacklers on the team. But in his whole career, he never had an interception at Mississippi State. I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? But you look at his skill set, and you got to say he's a developmental guy. But that's what you pay coaches to do, is to develop players. There are three guys in that draft. Actually, there's a fourth guy in the draft, because you go MJ Devonshire, the kid out of Pitt that they took in the 7th round, doesn't have nearly the measurables that Richardson does, but you put the tape on and the kid shows up. I mean, he's around the ball all the time. Now, at some point, his lack of measurables may hurt him a little bit, but I think he's a good football player. And then, they took a running back out of the University of New Hampshire, Dylan Laube, and all I'm going to say to you is watch the tape, because the kid does everything well. He's 5'10", he's 208 pounds, and you say you don't go get running backs from the University of New Hampshire, and that's true. But he can be the guy, I think, in their passing game that they need, because the running backs they have in house right now don't excel in the passing game. Laube is a great pass receiver. He's a better than, he's a great FCS running back, but he can return kicks, he can return punts, he can win for you in a lot of ways. And when you look at the bottom of the draft, you need guys that are going to improve the bottom of your roster. You know, Tommy Eichenberg from Ohio State, football guy, football guy. I mean, he's old school. I mean, he's Antonio Pierce all over again, right? And Trey Taylor, the safety that they took in the 7th round out of Air Force, is a really good football player. He'll help their football team on special teams, all that stuff. So I liked what they did in the draft, even though they didn't take a quarterback. Aiden O'Connell out of Purdue, who played for him last year and played way before he was ready to play and wasn't even in shape when he played, right? He's come back to all reports I get from my guys in the building is he's come back to mini camp and OTAs in way better shape, way better confidence, way better swagger. And he's not gonna give Minshew that job. They're going to have quarterback competition at camp, and that's what you want.
Yeah, I thought O'Connell at times last season, he showed what he can do, and I think that's again, it wasn't a guy who was a lot of expectations. He wasn't a first round pick or anything like that. So I think, it was, yeah, I think he did as well as he could have. I think you look at him, I don't think you look at him and think that's going to be an MVP or like a Hall of Famer, but I think as someone who can be solid and do a good job, I think he did well. And I think he showed me signs that he could, be at least a serviceable backup, if not, a lowercase starter, like maybe like a Brissett or like a Fitzpatrick sort of guy, where they're not going to be elite, and they have their limitations, but at the same time, they show you something, and they do a solid enough job in difficult situations. So, yeah, I expect Minshew to have the job. I expect him to start, but I think you're right. I don't expect O'Connell to give up the job easily. Now, one thing I was surprised by, actually, I don't know whether you were as well, was the Brock Bowers addition, because only a year ago before that, you went out and got Michael Mayer, and he had a lot of hype going into the season. And yeah, the stats don't show a great rookie season for him, but there were games. I think about the Chargers game, although I think everyone looked good in that game. He showed glimpses in the season, I think, in small bits where he could show he could be that guy. From I think to get him just a year ago in the 2nd round, did it seem a bit maybe presumptuous to go in again and get a tight end, or was it the case? Do you feel that maybe Brock Bowers is so good and such a big generational prospect? They're saying the best tight end prospect in years. Do you think that almost was almost like best player on the board mentality? If he's there, you can't turn down the opportunity to get him.
Well, I think that one of the things that you got to understand about the draft and when you're drafting is you don't overdraft for need, right? So when they looked at their board and they looked at their needs, Bowers was the best available player. And you got to take the best available player with the 1st round pick. And then, again, this is where the game has changed. This is where the league is starting to go, is coaches now are much more about give me the talent and let me fit my offense and defense to the talent, as opposed to I've got to have this kind of guy. Because the reality of it is sometimes there just aren't those kinds of guys at where you pick. And so you better be able to get the best player on your football team. And there's so much now in the NFL football, so much of what we call 12 personnel, one back, two tight ends, right? And one of the tight ends is an attached tight end, which is Meyer's strength. And the other tight end is a move tight end, or an H-back, we call him, which is Bauer's strength. And so to me, that really is a huge plus, because it stresses the defense in unique ways. Right now, one of the challenges that people have with Kansas City is, what do you do with Kelsey, right? Because you can't play a linebacker on him because he's too athletic. And you can't put a secondary guy on him typically because he's too big. Well, Bowers will give the Raiders that matchup capability. So now if you want to play nickel against them because they're in 12 personnel with Meyer on the field and Bowers in the slot and and they're moving him all over the place, that's going to stress your defense because if you play nickel, right? He's Let me say this, Bowers is a way better blocker than Travis Kelce is, right? And enjoys blocking much more than Travis Kelce does. So he's not, you watch him in the SEC as an online tight end. He'll stick his nose in there with the biggest defensive ends in college football. So I think that's a huge advantage for the Raiders. It's going to make everybody's job easier. It's going to make the run game better, right? Because you're going to be playing against light boxes all the time because of Bowers being on the field. And it's going to make the passing game better. So I just really feel like it was a really smart decision to take that kid. Now he's got to go stay healthy and prove it and all that stuff. But you draft them on what they've done and what you project they can do. And everybody had that kid as a first rounder.
Yeah, I can't really argue against that. And you're right about the quarterback thing about, what if the percentage rate of rookie quarterbacks do well. You think about the last few years, you had Trevor Lawrence in 2021, but you also had Mac Jones, Justin Fields, Trey Lance, and how many of them have worked out well? We all know only one of them. 2022 was pretty poor. I mean, Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett, no one else really. And I think this year you'll see, you've got Daniels, May, Nix, Caleb Williams. I think Caleb will obviously succeed because it's rare you get a first overall pick that's going to a 7-9 team with Swift and Keenan Allen and everyone else, DJ Moore. But I think you're right. I think if you can get a guy like Minshew who is solid, I think it goes a long way, and I think it certainly helps you. You'll get at least 7 wins out the season, and I think that's good enough for me. Now,
And let's not forget with Minshew's persona and what he brings. If you could take a picture of every quarterback in the National Football League right now and say which one is the Raider quarterback, and
yeah,
it would be Minshew. And I'm telling you, there's a lot to be said for that. What he can do to a football team. Now, I have a very close friend who coached him in Jacksonville, right? And he absolutely loves him, right? He said he's smart, he's tough, he's accurate with the football, right? He said he's goofy, but he said goofy in a positive way. He's loved by his teammates. He's a great leader. So I thought it was a smart move.
yeah, I think I mentioned this in one of our episodes a few weeks ago. That I think Minshew, he does look like a Raider. He does. I don't know whether it's the mustache or the long hair or riding the motorbike, or I think he just screams Vegas to me. You can imagine him,
The
yeah, having
only
a great
the
time
only
there.
the only thing he's missing is the eye patch. I mean,
Um, Before we go on to our win-loss tie, Steph, a quick question for you: who is the most likely Raider to win MVP in 2024?
well, I think when you say most valuable player, the guy that won't win it but probably could win it or should win it or would be if you say most valuable player or is it most outstanding player or I mean that award has become a quarterback award, let's be honest with it. And there's nobody in the quarterback room right now, I don't think, that's going to win that award. But certainly Max Crosby should be in consideration for that award. Because I'm going to tell you something. You look at the numbers he hangs, and he's constantly being chipped. He's being doubled. They try and move the pocket away from. They're doing everything in their power to limit the guy, and all he does is he's ultra productive every week. You see him play.
Yeah, he for me is he should be one of the favourites for me for defensive player of the year. I think you got the ones like TJ Watt, Nick Bosa, Miles Garrett, but I think Mike Parsons as well. But I think Max Crosby has to be in that conversation. You think about as well, you know, when you got a Broncos team that is probably going to be one of the worst teams in the league, in my opinion. I don't think it's all great there. The Chargers are going for a brand new coaching system. Herbert's not got a lot of weapons to throw to. So I think you got division there. Obviously, you got the Chiefs. That's gonna be tough games. But I think if you've got 4 games in a year against two teams that 2 games against the Broncos, 2 games against the Chargers, where neither team are really going to convince you on offense at the moment, that's a great chance to get the sacks up and get those numbers up and put yourself on the map to get noticed in terms of getting the vote. So I think, for me, if it's not one of Bosa, Garrett, Watt, Crosby, or Parson, I think I'll be very shocked in terms of that winning that Defensive Player of the Year award. But as well, actually, one thing I forgot to touch on was obviously the Netflix documentary Receiver, which obviously features a lot of Raiders when it comes to Davante Adams. Um, a lot of chatter recently about him going to the Jets, and obviously you saw on the Receiver one of the episodes where they're sort of alluding to next year. They say on the program when the Jets played the Raiders last year. Obviously, he expressed a lot of unhappiness about his time there, actually, but obviously things all changed when Pierce came in. Is that worry you at all in terms of Adams? Do you see him being there throughout the season? There's been so much talk about him leaving, and if they start the season 4-4 or 3-5, and the Jets go 7-2 or something like that, the trade deadline comes, and do you see him staying, or is there a worry for you at all? The fact that he could be one of those names that are shipped off mid-season by trade.
Well, I think first of all, we have to understand that the Raiders are going to do what's best for the Raiders. And, I think that Davante is a tremendous talent, a tremendous talent. And I've seen, articles in the last week about how other receivers in the league feel about him, and his peers recognize his ability. I don't think there's any question that, it's been a difficult time for him there, right? And but I do think that you got to take all of that with kind of a grain of salt. First of all, it's kind of the nature of the position, right? There are a couple positions on your football team that you're gonna have constant drama, right? One of them is wide receiver, the other one is defensive back. There's going to be constant drama in those meeting rooms, and it's a lot about managing egos, and it's a lot about managing personalities and all of it. And so that's just natural. You're going to have that kind. And now with all the access that these teams are giving, and I think it's good, right? But I think that stuff can get blown out of proportion, because there are always times that guys say things in frustration, right? Or in the heat of battle, or right after a game or whatever. You just got to understand that's those kind of blurts come out, they happen. And does he really want desperately to get out of Las Vegas? I don't think so, right? I think there's a lot of reasons he went there, and those reasons are still valid. I think it's important that they understand that he is a superstar, and superstars need to have a little bit different treatment. That's just the way it is, right? And he needs to see the ball early. He needs to see the ball a lot. And I think the relationship that he develops with Minshew is going to be critical. And I think, with their offensive staff, he's got to be seen. And I think this is important. Your superstars, and he falls in that category, you've got to manage your relationship with your superstars. It's not as bad as NBA basketball, but it's getting that way in pro football. Coach that I know, an ex-NBA head coach, told me, he said, Jeff, here's what coaching in the NBA is. You manage your 3 best superstars, and everybody else just goes along for the ride, right? And I think that's becoming kind of what's happening in pro football. You've got superstars. Davante is a superstar. Max is a superstar. You better manage those personalities. You better make sure those guys are happy. Now, not at the point of kissing their ass, but at a point of you got to treat them like the kind of players that they are. And you do that, number one, by paying them big money, which Mr. Davis has done. And number two, you let them know that they're the alphas in the room.
I agree. I agree. And I think there's a reason why the Lions went out and paid, Amos and Brown and Jared Goff, and I think you want to keep best players happy, and I think it's such a big thing, and with the salary cap and all that stuff attached, you have to be careful who you're paying, and you want to make sure that you get your guys across the finish line when it comes to signing the contracts. So we are going to head on to our win-loss tie segment. Of course, you were on here both last year and the year before. So the Raiders went 8-9 in 2023. Do you by chance remember what your record prediction was last year?
I really can't. No.
You
What
were
was it?
really close, 7-9-1.
Okay. That's
So
pretty good if I was
yeah,
only off by one.
and that was a tie, which rarely happened. So yeah, I was almost the perfect prediction. The first 2 weeks are on the road, and the first one is to the Los Angeles Chargers, win, loss, or tie.
I think it's going to be a win. I think the I think you mentioned the Chargers are going to go through transition. Harbaugh is going to make them tougher. He's going to make them better. He's going to make them run the ball better. But I don't know if, they have, it'll take time, is what I'm going to say. You know, I think that's a great place for them to open. The Raiders are still LA's team. You can say what you want about the Rams and the Chargers. When you go to LA, you see more Raider jerseys than you see Rams jerseys or Chargers jerseys.
Yeah, I think Raiders jerseys just all throughout America. I see a lot more Raiders jerseys than Chargers or Rams, if I'm honest. Week 2 is against the Baltimore Ravens, win, loss, or tie.
I think that's going to be a loss. I think, again, you go west, an hour's flight, and now you got to go east, a 6 hour flight. It's tougher. And the Ravens are a great football team on the road. That'll be a tall task. I'm gonna give them an L there.
Yeah, don't blame me there. Number one seed in the AFC for a reason. Next 2 games at home. The first one is to the Carolina Panthers.
That's a definite W. So we go to 2-1.
Yes, and then week 4 is against the Cleveland Browns.
That's going to be an interesting game. I think a lot's going to depend on Deshaun Watson and how effective he's going to be. But I like the Raiders' chances at home.
Okay, so that's 3-1 going into your week 5 game on the road to the Denver Broncos.
This is a big one. I mean, it's a big one, and this will be early. With Bo Nix at the controls, probably in Denver. I saw Denver play at the end of the season live against Buffalo, and they snuck a win out against the Bills, but they had to rely on the Bills having too many men on a field goal situation to do it. I'm not convinced yet. I think that rebuild is going to take a couple more years. I'm going to take the Raiders.
I agree, and I said it before in the last episode. My hot take is that Sean Payton may not last the season. I've got a feeling it may all go sour there if it goes wrong again. Week 6 is a home game against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Tough one. Again, this is going to be really interesting to watch because who's going to be playing quarterback for the Steelers at that point? I think the Steelers probably are a little better football team right now, top to bottom, than the Raiders are. And again, this is really interesting because this is a pivotal game for them. If they can get this one, they're running. I mean, they'll be hot, and they'll be, I don't know what they'd be, 4 or 5-1 at that point, and they'd be a dangerous football team if that's the case. But I think this is where they stub their toe at home a little bit.
Okay, so that means you go 4-2, going speaking to LA. You're in LA playing the Rams in week 7.
Uh, you know, I think again, LA is just their home. I mean, it's just I'm going to take them at home against the Rams, and again, is Matthew Stafford going to be healthy at that point, right? So we'll see. I'd say early on this will be a toss-up game, but I'm going to take the Raiders just because I love the Raiders.
Fair enough. I love that. Week 8 is against the Chiefs at home.
Chiefs will get them. That this is interesting though. The Raiders are not afraid of the Chiefs. You could see that last year when they played them, and they've got a recipe on how to beat them. And we saw it last, I think it was January, December, so late in the season. I'm gonna take Kansas City, but again, I think this is gonna be a very good football game. That's a great one. That'll be a great one to watch.
I agree. Should be. I don't know whether it's prime time or not, but it may well be the case. Before your week 10 bye, it's a week 9 road game in Cincinnati.
Cincinnati, tough place to play. Uh, again, how healthy is Joe Burrow going to be? That's the question. Again, this is one of those ones of very, very, the Raiders should be in every game, but I think that Cincinnati on the road, coming off of Kansas City, is a tough one. That's a tough stretch right there. You got two really good football teams.
So I didn't quite get that win, loss, or tie. Sorry.
I'm going to say that's going to be an L.
Okay. So week 11 after your bye is a road game against the Dolphins.
Um, you know, you're coming out of a bye, and that's a positive. You're traveling east, so it's easier out of a bye than it is normally. Uh, you know, I don't know about the Dolphins. I don't know. Like the Dolphins had such a tumultuous off season, right? I'm not sure. So I'm gonna say the Dolphins will win that, but I think it's gonna be real close.
That's the answer I want to hear. Week 12 is a home game against the Broncos.
They get the Broncos a second time, and they get them at home. They win.
Okay. So week 13 is back against the Chiefs. This time you're going to Arrowhead.
Arrowhead's a tough place to play. Again, like I said, they're not going to be afraid of the Chiefs, but I think the Chiefs are still right now just the best team in the AFC.
Week 14, you're on the road again, but this time against the Buccaneers.
I think they get the Bucks. I think they go down to Tampa Bay and win that thing, and they're gonna start their playoff push now.
Yeah, it's interesting what happens with them with Baker without Dave Canales. Intrigued how he'll do because Dave Canales basically resurrected his career, so I'm intrigued how he'll do by then. Week 15 is on the road on at home, I should say, sorry, against the Falcons.
They'll beat the Falcons. I think we'll see. We might have Mike Penix. We might have Mike Penix sighting that week.
You never know. Week 16 is a home game against the Jaguars.
Again, I think the Raiders are good enough to beat the Jags at home, and I'm gonna give the Raiders a win and a tight one.
So week 17, your final road game of the regular season is against the New Orleans Saints.
Tough place to play, New Orleans, but again, and the whole car factor with this game is going to be really interesting to watch. I'm going to give the Saints the edge just because it's in New Orleans.
Okay. Then going into week 18, you're 10-6 as you play the Chargers at home.
Chargers at home. Again, I'm going to say that the Raiders get this and they get 11 wins and they're going to the playoffs.
And if they get to the playoffs, how far do they get?
I think they'll last. Again, in a wild card game, I think they can get to the second round. I think that'll be one win in the playoffs and then get eliminated in the second game that you play. But I think that the Raiders, like I said, I saw that over and under 6 wins, and I was surprised at that. And I think that this team can win as many as 11 games.
And of course, amazingly, that if they win a playoff game, will be their first playoff win since the year they made the Super Bowl with Rich Gannon. So that's they'll want to try and end that long wait for a playoff win.
Well, Andy, you know how long ago that was because I played against Rich Gannon in college.
Wow.
It's been a few years.
We are running short on time, so we're going to end the podcast now. But once again, huge thank you for Jeff for coming on today.
It's always my pleasure, man. Anytime you want to do it, let's do it again.
Great stuff, mate. Good to have you on. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this episode, this Raiders season preview, and we'll see you guys for our next season preview. Take care.
Aloha.